Hi, I'm Venus. And at my sister's wedding, they sat me next to the coat rack, labeled me Overflow, and smiled as if that small cruelty was an act of kindness. But it wasn't just the chair or the corner I was pushed into. It was every photo I had been carefully cropped out of, every toast I was never asked to raise a glass, for every memory rewritten with my name missing. It was a lifetime of being erased, one polite smile at a time. The ring my grandmother promised me, the one she slipped onto my finger when I was 13 and whispered, "This is yours." One day gone. Passed on to someone else as if her promise, like my place in the family, was disposable. Even my name, the one gift I thought couldn't be stolen, had been spoken less and less until it belonged more to silence than to me. And the worst part, I stood there in the shadows watching it happen. Watching them rewrite history while pretending I wasn't even part of it. So let me ask you, what does it take for a family to erase one of their own? And what happens when the person they tried so hard to bury decides she won't stay quiet anymore? The resort was everything you'd imagine a Santa Barbara wedding with a six-figure budget to be. Whitewashed columns wrapped in bougainvillea that spilled down like fire-colored ribbons. A champagne tower glittering under crystal chandeliers. Waitstaff in sharp black ties gliding through the ballroom like pieces in a perfect choreography. It was the kind of scene meant to dazzle, to blind you into believing everything was flawless. And there, I was standing just outside the glow of it all, clutching a clutch I didn't even like, whispering to myself the same mantra I had repeated for years. Just smile. Just get through it. Pretend it doesn't hurt. I had rehearsed my role, arrive quietly. Be supportive, act like I cared without letting anyone see that I still did. But the air was colder than I expected. At the check-in table, the woman barely looked up when I said my name, Venus Calloway. She paused, shuffled through the cards longer than necessary, then plucked one out with a tight, careful smile. "You're at table 6B. Overflow. Overflow." The word was written neatly under my name as if it had always been part of me. She pointed me past the glittering ballroom toward a corner tucked by the coat check. A thin curtain separated the space just enough to pretend it belonged, though the only view of the dance floor required craning your neck around a ficus tree. My name was printed in cursive, Venus Calloway, Overflow, table 6B. My throat tightened, but I thanked her anyway. It wasn't just the table. It was what it meant. I wasn't a distant cousin. I wasn't a co-worker's plus one. I was the bride's sister. And somehow I still didn't deserve a place in the room where the real family sat. I walked slowly, trying not to let my heels click too sharply against the marble, the sound too loud in a space that didn't seem to want me there. Guests brushed past me, their eyes sliding over me with that practiced look of polite dismissal. Maybe they didn't know who I was. Or maybe they did and chose not to care. The chair at table 6B faced a hallway leading to the restrooms. A half-empty pitcher of water sat in the middle, condensation pooling beneath it. Someone had already claimed one of the seats with their jacket, like even here, even at the overflow table, I wasn't guaranteed space. I hadn't even sat down when I saw her. My mother, Lorraine. She was near Celine, the bride, my sister. She was fussing over her veil, smoothing it with delicate fingers, laughing, glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was the kind of laughter you save for someone precious, someone chosen. I stepped forward, clearing my throat softly. "Hi, Mom." She glanced at me, her eyes grazing mine only long enough to register surprise. "Oh, you still came." No hug. No warmth. Not even a smile that reached her eyes. Just those 4 words, like my presence was an inconvenience she thought she'd avoided. I opened my mouth, searching for something, anything to say. But before I could, her attention was already back on Celine. She adjusted the bouquet in her hands, flicked a speck of lint off her sleeve, and kept laughing. I stood there stupidly, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. Of course, it's her big day. I finally managed the words, clumsy and small. "You look nice," she said absently, her eyes sliding past me again. Then she turned, waving toward the photographer, her hand dismissing me as easily as brushing away dust. And just like that, I was back in my place, the overflow. I backed away, returning to my assigned seat like someone who had been mistakenly dropped off on the wrong floor of a hotel, but too timid, too embarrassed to ask for a different room. My heels clicked softly against the marble, each step echoing the hollowness in my chest. When I reached the overflow section, a couple nearby guests leaned toward one another. Their voices hushed, but not nearly enough to keep me from hearing. "Is she a cousin?" one asked. "No," the other whispered back, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "She's the sister, I think." The words burned hotter than if they had shouted them across the room. I lowered myself into my chair without meeting their eyes, fumbling for my phone. The screen was blank, but I pretended to read an urgent message, anything to shield my face. The glass reflected back what the others saw, a woman holding herself together, cheeks flushing, desperate not to unravel under the weight of scrutiny. I hadn't come to steal attention. I hadn't come to ignite drama. I only wanted something simple: acknowledgement. To sit beside my family, not at the fringe of it. To be seen, not as an afterthought or an obligation, but as a daughter, a sister, a piece of the story that had been written without me. The curtain behind me shifted slightly as someone slipped past the movement, stirring a draft of cold air that brushed my arm. I sat down, finally placing my clutch on the wobbly table as if it could anchor me, keep me steady. My fingers brushed against the heavy cardstock of my name tag again. I lifted it, turned it over, studied the single word pressed in neat cursive letters. Overflow. It shouldn't have mattered. It was just ink on paper. But the weight of it pressed against me like a verdict. Something inside me bent under its force. Not shattered, not yet, but bending like glass under strain, the kind of crack that begins invisible and grows slowly until one day it can no longer hold. From my shadowed corner, I had a partial view of the ballroom. Chandeliers glowed above like golden halos, their light rippling across the polished dance floor, shimmering on the radiant faces of guests who laughed easily, who belonged without question. I hadn't even truly sat down yet, and already I felt discarded, like the celebration had begun long ago and no one remembered I had RSVP'd. At last, I sank into my seat. The chair wobbled beneath me, one leg shorter than the others. Of course, I thought bitterly. Even the furniture seemed to agree I didn't belong here. I watched my sister across the room as she glided from group to group, effortlessly weaving between her college roommates, co-workers, and neighbors who kissed her cheeks and told her she looked radiant. Her laugh rang out bright and practiced the kind of laugh I once thought was charming, but now recognized as rehearsed, engineered to carry across a room. Then the staff began setting up a screen and projector. A hush fell as the lights dimmed, acoustic guitar notes softening the air. The slideshow began. The first photo, Celine as a toddler perched on a picnic blanket beside our grandmother. The second, her 5th birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese frosting smeared across her cheeks. Then came the endless stream of childhood Christmas mornings, ballet recitals, beach vacations. The timeline unfolded seamlessly: elementary school braces, prom, college graduation, her engagement. Each chapter honored each memory, carefully curated. But not once, not a single frame did I appear. Not just absent from the solo shots that I could have accepted, but erased. Cropped out of family portraits, edited from holidays, ignored at reunions where I knew I had stood just inches away. I remembered the reunion in Utah. I'd stood in the back row directly behind Celine and Dad. In the slideshow, that row had been cut off, cropped clean like it never existed. I remembered Palm Springs, the spring break trip where I had taken her photo at sunset. The slideshow showed that sunset, but not me, not even the faintest trace of the person behind the lens. And as each slide flickered by a lifetime, I had lived in blurred silence. I realized the truth: this wasn't just oversight. It was deliberate. They weren't just forgetting me. They were erasing me. I felt my face begin to burn, a slow, creeping heat that spread from my cheeks down my neck, betraying me even as I tried to sit perfectly still. The couple beside me shifted awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to acknowledge me or pretend I didn't exist. The man leaned in close to his partner, his voice low but not low enough. "Isn't she the sister?" His tone wasn't sharp, not even unkind, just puzzled, like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. The woman, tilting her head slightly, answered with equal confusion. "I didn't see her in any of those pictures." I locked my gaze straight ahead, every muscle in my face frozen into something resembling composure. I couldn't let them see my hands trembling beneath the table. So I gave them something else to look at me, calm, controlled, untouchable. I crossed my legs, uncrossed them again, reached for my glass of water, took the slowest possible sip, and set it back down with deliberate care. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't forgetfulness. They hadn't simply misplaced me in the narrative. No, this was a choice, a deliberate excision. And that realization hurt far worse than if they'd just overlooked me. Near the end of the slideshow, a voice announced over the soft music. And now Celine and Garrett begin a new chapter surrounded by those who've always been there for them. The words landed like a slap. Always been there. I pressed my lips together until they almost disappeared. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Slowly, quietly, I stood not with drama, not with protest, just enough to remove myself from the spotlight of humiliation. I drifted toward the back wall, closer to the refreshment table where I could blend into the shadows. I didn't trust myself to stay seated. The slideshow ended. The lights brightened. Conversation resumed as if nothing at all had happened, as though no one had just been erased from an entire family's history in front of 70 witnesses. I wanted to scream, but all I managed was silence. And then came the second blow. One of the event planners, polished and smiling, stepped forward carrying a velvet box. She handed it to Celine during a toast. The entire room seemed to lean in with anticipation. Celine stood in the center of the ballroom, glowing under the chandeliers. My mother Lorraine swept to her side, slipping an arm around her waist like she was cradling royalty. Selena opened the box. Inside was a thin gold bracelet, a single pearl at its center. My breath caught. I knew it instantly. Our grandmother's bracelet. When she passed, she'd taken my hand on the porch and whispered, "This will be yours because you're the one who sat with me when I was sick." She'd made it clear. It was mine. Months ago, I had mailed it to my mother for cleaning and safekeeping, wrapped carefully in a soft pouch tied with ribbon. I hadn't wanted to wear it daily, but I had wanted it preserved. Now Celine held it aloft as though it had always belonged to her. "Mom gave me this," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Grandma's favorite piece." She always said I reminded her of strength and grace. The room broke into applause. Lorraine nodded approvingly, her smile a seal of authenticity, as if the world had just been perfectly aligned. I didn't move, didn't speak. I reached for a flute of champagne, lifted it halfway to my lips, and realized my hand was shaking too violently to drink. I lowered it again, arranging my face into a faint, polite smile. On the outside, I was composed. Inside, the cold was threading through my spine, knotting into something harder than sorrow. They could take the seat. They could crop the photo. They could rewrite the memory. But they could not dictate my reaction. That, at least, was still mine. Someone approached then, concern softening their voice. "Are you okay?" I turned, smiled the kind of smile I'd learned to wear, and answered lightly. "Lovely toast, wasn't it?" The woman nodded, though her eyes flickered with doubt. She wasn't fooled, not entirely. But she didn't press, and for that I was grateful. I excused myself with quiet grace, not toward the restroom, but out the nearest side door. The ocean breeze hit me immediately, salty, unrelenting, real. The sky was streaked with amber and violet, the sun dipping toward the horizon. Out there, beyond the curated perfection of the ballroom, I could breathe again. Along the jagged edge of the resort, waves hurled themselves against the cliff, rising and falling with a rhythm so steady it felt ancient, almost eternal. The water didn't ask permission to exist. It didn't care who was watching. And maybe that was why I stood there, letting the spray touch my skin, refusing to reach for my phone, refusing to capture the moment, refusing even to send a single text. For once, there would be no evidence, no curated proof of my presence. Just me, the ocean, and the quiet reminder of my own breath. My name, my gift. My place in the family story, all stripped away in a single evening, erased so cleanly it was as if I had never been there. And so standing against that salty wind, I thought maybe this is the part where I start erasing them too. Forgetting the ones who had so easily forgotten me. The breeze cooled my flushed cheeks, steadied the fire in my chest, but it didn't untangle the knot in my mind. When I finally turned back, slipping through the side door into the venue again, the ocean clung faintly to me, a salt-borne armor. But it was quickly smothered by the heavy sweetness of floral perfume that filled the foyer. The air was different in here, artificial loud. Laughter bounced off marble walls. Heels clicked against polished stone, voices rose in delighted reunion. I lowered my gaze and walked carefully, weaving past aunts who hadn't spoken my name in 10 years, and Celine's friends who looked right through me. In their eyes, I wasn't a sister, not a daughter, not family. I was decoration, a shadow under the chandeliers blending in with the wallpaper. Then an interruption. My cousin Charlotte, her energy nervous and bright in that way only teenagers possess, hurried over to me. She pressed a glossy program into my hand. "Hey, I grabbed an extra for you. But they spelled your name wrong." I looked down. The cover gleamed with Garrett and Celine's engagement photo. Their smiles fixed, airbrushed golden. Beneath, in embossed letters, the guest list. And there it was, Vina Callahan. Not Venus, not Calloway. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't innocent. It was careless, dismissive. Another tiny cut meant to bleed me out slowly. I scanned the room until I found my mother radiant in conversation near the dessert table. Her laughter smooth, elegant. I walked toward her with the program in hand. When she finally turned to me, I held it out, my voice calm. "I think the planner made a mistake. They listed me as Vina Callahan." Her eyes flicked over the page once before sliding away. I sent them a spreadsheet. Maybe the planner didn't double-check. "It's a small thing. Does it matter?" The way she said it, flat, dismissive, like brushing lint from her sleeve, told me everything. My name, my place, my presence. Small things, easily misfiled, easily forgotten. I opened my mouth to answer, but stopped. She wouldn't hear it anyway. I walked back to my table without another word. Table 6B, overflow. A seat by the exit, far enough from the laughter to remind me I wasn't meant to belong. The hall was crowded now, vibrant and warm, but my table was still empty. An island of neglect in a sea of celebration. A woman in a red dress passed by carrying a tray of champagne flutes. She paused when her eyes landed on me. "Oh, are you one of the vendors?" she asked kindly enough. I smiled thinly. "No, I'm not working today." Her face flushed. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I just thought because of where you're sitting." "It's fine," I said. But it wasn't. She couldn't know. She couldn't see that this wasn't about seating charts or table numbers. It wasn't about where I sat, but whether I existed at all in their eyes. She couldn't know that the real wound wasn't the typo or the photos or even the stolen bracelet. It was being asked again and again. "Who are you? Do you belong here? Are you part of this story?" And the worst part wasn't their question. It was that for the first time, I wasn't sure I knew the answer anymore. And so I kept pretending not to hear it, the question behind every sideways glance, every polite smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Why are you even here?" The words weren't spoken aloud, but they floated around me, thick as perfume, impossible to ignore. Another server passed by with a tray of champagne. He didn't even pause. Didn't even look in my direction. My water pitcher, though, had been quietly replaced, and someone had cleared away the half-eaten bread plates I'd abandoned earlier. Small, invisible gestures like evidence that I existed only as part of the cleanup. I let my eyes linger on the glass of water in front of me, tracing the beads of condensation as they slid slowly toward the base. I watched too long, as if the steady drip could give me an answer the people in this room never would. A blur of laughter, and suddenly a child came rushing past, dropping a folded program by my feet, before disappearing into the crowd again. I bent to pick it up. On the back was a printed thank you message signed in swirling cursive by Celine and my mother. No mention of Dad. No mention of Garrett. Certainly no mention of me. I held it for a beat, then folded it in half, then in half again until the letters blurred into nothing. And when the paper finally crumpled in my hand, I turned and tossed it into the trash bin tucked into the hallway corner. Perhaps that was fitting. Maybe I'd stop answering to that name anyway. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. The MC's voice, carried through the speakers, rehearsed and cheerful, calling the crowd's attention for the toasts. The lights dimmed slightly, soft amber falling across crystal glasses and polished silverware. The hum of anticipation spread like static buzzing through the air as guests leaned toward one another, ready to laugh on cue. I didn't move. I stayed pressed against the curtain that separated me from the celebration, invisible and unmissed. Someone clinked a glass. Laughter swelled in response. I stayed in the shadows. Through the glass wall, I looked out at the perfectly arranged tables, each centerpiece glowing beneath the chandeliers. Every detail shimmered mirrored surfaces, gilded edges, curated smiles. The room was designed to shine, and yet it had no place for me. They had reassigned my seat. They had misspelled my name. They had cropped my face out of their story. And yet eventually, people like me stand up anyway. From my quiet corner, I watched Celine move through the camera flashes as if she had been practicing for this her entire life. She tilted her head at the perfect angle bouquet resting just so against her waist. Someone whispered something in her ear, and she threw her head back in a flawless laugh, hand landing on her hip like a model striking her pose. The photographer cooed encouragement. Celine shone like she belonged on the cover of a bridal magazine. Maybe that was always what she wanted to look, staged perfect like a catalog version of herself. The music swelled, then a track from one of those polished playlists carefully chosen to sound effortless, though every note was pre-approved by whoever managed the evening's aesthetic. Nothing raw, nothing real. Like everything else that night, the music already knew who was meant to be seen and who was not. I stood by the drinks table, fingers pressed against the slick glass of a sweating bottle, letting its condensation numb my skin. The chill grounded me, if only for a second. 2 more hours, I told myself. Just 2 more hours, and then I could disappear on my own terms. No scene, no drama, just gone. That's when Celine spotted me. I hadn't meant to meet her eyes. I'd been careful all night to orbit the edges of the room, staying where the shadows softened me into something unnoticeable. But then there it was, a lock of eyes, brief, too long, impossible to deny. I hesitated before crossing the room. Not because I wanted confrontation. God, no. I only carried the faintest, most fragile hope that maybe I'd misunderstood all of this. Maybe she'd see me and say something small, something human. Sorry you got stuck out there. Mom's been impossible. Or even just thanks for coming. But she didn't. As I neared, she pivoted to her friend's voice, rising just enough to slice the air. Venus thinks this is her intervention. Don't be dramatic. It's just a wedding. Laughter followed, not cruel exactly, not thunderous, but sharp enough to sting, loud enough for the sound to stick to me. I froze. My mouth opened, then closed again. And just like that, she was gone already, turning back toward the camera, tilting her head at the perfect angle bouquet lifted like a prop, as though nothing had happened. Or maybe she truly believed nothing had. Because in their eyes, they had already decided who I was. Not the sister who quietly paid the deposit. Not the one who proofread every line of her graduate school essays 3 nights in a row, eyes burning but determined. Not the one who flew in for every birthday even when the invitations stopped coming. No, I wasn't that sister. I was the dramatic one. The disruption. The awkward pause given human form. A staff member passed by balancing a tray of tiny hors d'oeuvres. I shook my head. My throat felt sandpaper dry, so I walked toward the self-serve water station instead. I twisted at the cap of a plastic bottle, the seal stubborn and tight, when I felt a gentle tap on my elbow. "Excuse me," a woman's voice said, warm, polite. I turned. She wore a sequin shawl that caught the light with every movement. "Could you grab more napkins for our table?" I blinked. Sorry." She smiled, patient, as if repeating herself to a slow child. "Napkins. We've run out." I stared at her, then looked down at myself, my plain dress, not black, not bright, chosen carefully to be neutral safe. Shoes that weren't quite flats, not quite heels. Invisible attire, apparently indistinguishable from staff uniform. "I don't work here," I said softly. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, the realization landing like a shard of glass under bare feet. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." I thought she cut herself off, words dissolving as her face flushed. And then she was gone, retreating quickly, head turned away as though pretending she hadn't mistaken me for someone who didn't belong. It lasted only seconds, but it lingered. Because it wasn't just that I was ignored, it was that I was mistakable, replaceable. A placeholder no one would notice had been swapped out. I carried the water bottle back to my table. The chair squeaked as I sat groaning in protest, like even the furniture resented my presence. My phone buzzed once, just a news notification, meaningless noise in a night already filled with it. I unlocked it anyway. Not to scroll, not to distract, but to find something real. And there it was, buried but waiting. A message from my therapist, sent months ago, one I had saved but never replied to. You're allowed to walk away from what erases you. I read it once, then again slower this time. My throat tightened. My thumb hovered above the keyboard, trembling with a question I had been carrying all night, maybe my whole life. Was tonight the moment I finally listened? I almost typed out a message to Mom, to Celine, maybe even just to myself. Something small. Something that would at least prove I still had a voice in all of this. But instead, I opened a blank note on my phone and wrote a single line. They made me the joke so they could laugh without guilt. No tears came. No desperate texts, just words, sharp and steady, flowing from me onto the screen. A list began to form beneath that first sentence. Not a list of grievances exactly, but of release. Hopes I had carried for too long. Expectations I had twisted myself into knots trying to meet. The version of family I thought I would be stepping into today, the one where my name was said with pride, my presence acknowledged with gratitude. One by one, I typed them out and let them go. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable clink of silverware against glass. A sound that always meant silence was expected, that the air was about to shift. Conversations quieted, chairs creaked into stillness. And then came my father's voice. Thin, careful, the kind of voice that tries to hold dignity, but cracks under the weight of its own restraint. I just want to say a few words about my daughter. The room leaned forward, listening. I froze, suspended between breath and heartbeat. They had already rewritten my name, my seat, my story. Now I waited to see which daughter would be conjured in his words, and if the one he described had ever truly been me. Then my name, spoken like it still belonged to me. And even Venus showed up. He set his glass raised high, his smile soft and satisfied. She's always quietly supportive. The words gentle on his tongue cut clean through me. Around the tables, polite laughter rippled. Glasses clinked in approval. Always quietly supportive. That was the version of me they loved most, the daughter who never asked for more, the sister who folded herself small so others could shine brighter. Convenient, manageable, erased. My phone buzzed in my lap. I didn't need to check it, but I did anyway. From Dad. Don't cause a rift today. Be the bigger person you always were. The words blurred before my eyes, the letters swimming. I locked the screen and placed the phone face down like it had betrayed me. This wasn't new. It was the refrain of my entire life. I had been praised for my patience, for letting things slide, for understanding. Be graceful, Venus. Don't upset your sister. Don't ruin the moment. For years, I wore those words like a crown. Graceful, reasonable, mature. It took decades before I realized it wasn't grace they admired, it was disappearance. They had applauded me not for who I was, but for how well I could erase myself. Across the ballroom, the mood shifted again. The music softened to a hum as the toasts gave way to idle chatter guests, stretching their legs, trading seats, refreshing their glasses. Then Celine took the microphone, glowing in the spotlight, every bit the star of her own stage. There's someone really special I want to thank tonight. She began syrupy sweet, her voice strong and sure. Someone who's been my inspiration, my compass, and my reminder of what elegance truly looks like. My stomach tightened. The words already formed in my chest before she even spoke them. And then Mom, walking up the stage, radiant and smug, holding a small velvet box. My breath caught. I didn't need to see inside. I already knew. Celine opened it slowly, theatrically gasping like it was a surprise. The photographer leaned in as she lifted the ring from its cushion, holding it high for the room to admire. It's Grandma's. The sound of my heart stopping was almost audible, because I knew that ring. Not in passing, not in some unspoken hope. It had been promised to me. A quiet conversation, just the two of us, my grandmother's fragile hand clutching mine as her teacup rattled in its saucer. Her voice low, nearly breaking. "This one's yours when the time comes. I see too much of me in you to let it go elsewhere." That memory had lived in me like an anchor, a rare and precious truth in a family that had always found ways to paint me out of the picture. And now, before my eyes, that promise was rewritten too. And there it was glittering beneath the chandelier light raised high in my sister's hand like a prize she had earned. My mother's arm was wrapped tightly around Celine's waist, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "You've always reminded me of her. Strong, brilliant, kind." The applause was immediate, a swell of clapping hands and approving nods as if the entire room had been waiting to crown her. I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to draw in a breath that felt like it had been lodged in my throat for hours. My chest ached, a band tightening around my ribs, and my temples throbbed with every heartbeat. I didn't move toward the door. No, I refused to let them see me retreat. Instead, I walked to the bar, each step measured, deliberate. The bartender caught my eye, studied my face for a beat longer than polite, then slid a glass across the counter without asking. I wrapped my hand around it, cool against my skin, and turned back toward the ballroom. That's when I saw her. Celine near the photo booth, laughing with someone I didn't recognize. Her laugh was light, practiced, her head tilted back just enough to catch the perfect angle if a camera turned her way. For a moment, I just watched, taking in how effortlessly she occupied the space I had been written out of. Then I moved. Calm, quiet, purposeful. She noticed me only when I was beside her, standing just outside the reach of the photo booth's flash. My voice was low, even carrying just enough weight that it couldn't be mistaken. "You can keep rewriting me out," I said. "You're good at it. But if this is war, don't expect me to stay quiet anymore." Her laughter stopped. Her expression barely shifted, trained as she was to maintain composure. But her eyes betrayed her. Something flickered, a tightening in her jaw before she caught it. She blinked slow and deliberate, then tilted her head with a practiced softness. "It's not that deep, Venus. You just always make everything about you." I smiled. The kind of smile that wasn't joy, but recognition. "You'd know." I didn't wait for her reply. I turned and walked away, not out of the venue, not yet, but toward a part of myself I had silenced for far too long. As I passed a cluster of tables, I caught the sound of someone's laughter, sharp and careless, and a voice muttering about how family gatherings always drag out the weird ones. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. Their words slid off me, but not without leaving a mark. At the far end of the ballroom, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down, reading the message without breaking stride. From Celine, make sure she's not anywhere near the cake toast. I kept walking straight past the warm pools of light, past the curated laughter and polite conversations, past the version of me they had edited into the background. I walked toward my own name, the one they tried to erase but couldn't. The sun outside had dipped lower, washing the ballroom in amber light that softened every edge. The energy shifted the dinner, winding down guests, drifting toward the cake table screens, flickering to life with carefully curated slideshows of Celine's life. I lingered just outside the main entrance, my glass half empty, the wine long since gone warm. I hadn't planned to re-enter yet. But I did. And when I stepped back in, I felt it. A ripple, subtle but unmistakable, as if the room sensed the fracture they were trying so hard to disguise. Near the floral arch, a group photo was forming. Dresses rustled, heels clicked against the polished floor. I stepped closer only to feel it instantly, the shift in energy, the sideways glances. One of Celine's bridesmaids turned her head, eyes grazing over me before she leaned toward the photographer, whispering something quick, urgent. The photographer's smile faltered. His lens lowered an inch. And just like that, I knew. I wasn't supposed to be in that frame either. Moments later, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years approached me. Her smile was the kind people give when they're not sure if they're being kind or cruel, tight-lipped, polite, sharp at the edges. "Celine's going for clean symmetry," she said. Only bridal tones in this shot. Her words were soft, but the meaning landed hard. I glanced down at my dress. Cream, not white, not even close. But still the message had been received loud and clear. Got it. I replied, my voice steady. No protest, no bite. I stepped back before she could elaborate, before she could offer the next excuse they'd rehearsed for me. My feet carried me away, my chest heavy, though my face betrayed nothing. As I passed the open bar, I thought almost bitterly how everything in this wedding was curated to perfection. The flowers, the lighting, the playlist, the symmetry of the photographs. Everything except the way they treated people. A videographer near the photo booth was adjusting his camera, fiddling with the focus. Needing a distraction, I drifted closer, curiosity pulling me toward the soft glow of the backdrop. I stepped into the light just to see how it felt, how it looked. That's when he hesitated. His hands stilled. His shoulders shifted with discomfort, and his lens lowered an inch. I was told to keep the bridal party tight. He murmured, his eyes fixed anywhere but mine. By who? I asked, though I already knew. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. That was when my phone vibrated. I slid it out of my pursed thumbs, swiping across the screen, and opened the thread with Celine. A message I hadn't bothered to read, sitting there for 2 days waiting. Please don't wear white. Don't stand in the center. It's not your day. The words blurred for a moment, but not from the screen. From me. My throat tightened. My presence here hadn't just been tolerated. It had been managed, controlled, micromanaged down to the color of my dress, the angle of my smile, the space I was allowed to occupy. I walked slowly, then deliberately toward the main entrance. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor until I stopped in front of the welcome table. The name board was still there, pristine, carefully lettered in glossy calligraphy, "Welcome to the wedding of Celine Holloway and Garrett Voss." And just beneath it, "Hosted with love by Celine and Lorraine Holloway." I stared at the names, the omission of mine, louder than anything else in that crowded ballroom. Then I moved to the reception desk, where a young coordinator was bent over gift bags, straightening ribbons that didn't need straightening. Excuse me. I said, my tone soft but unwavering. Could you check who signed the original deposit for the event, the name on the booking? She blinked, startled, then glanced at her clipboard. Her fingers flipped through a few pages before stopping. It says, Venus Calloway. Processed 2 years ago. Co-deposit, right? I nodded, once quiet but certain. Thank you. I turned back to the welcome board, my pulse steady, now not frantic. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my place card. Venus Calloway. Overflow table 6B. I placed it directly beneath the hosted by sign. No tape, no straightening, no attempt to make it blend in with their perfection. I left it slightly crooked, just enough to disturb the symmetry. Then I took out my phone. One click, a single photo. I didn't post it. I didn't send it. I just saved it, tucked it away like proof of something only I needed to know. Not everything had to be broadcast to matter. A few guests passed by, catching sight of the card. Some raised their eyebrows. Others looked away quickly, as if pretending not to see what was right in front of them. No one said a word. But they saw. They knew. And so did I. One guest glanced at the card, then at me. She said nothing, but the faintest nod tugged at her chin, as if she understood more than she dared to admit. It was the kind of silent solidarity that lasts only a heartbeat. Fragile and fleeting, but enough to remind me I wasn't completely invisible. I turned to leave, ready to dissolve back into the crowd when I saw her. Celine. Across the room, mimosa in hand, her face lit with the polite laughter reserved for cocktail chatter. She was halfway through a smile when her gaze snagged on the card I'd left beneath the welcome sign. Her expression froze. For a fraction of a second, her eyes locked with mine. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but long enough for me to see the calculation behind her stare. Long enough for her to register what I had done. Then her mask snapped back into place. Her fingers tightened around her glass before she set it down and reached for her phone. Her movements were sharp, purposeful, as if she'd rehearsed this exact scenario. Back near the DJ booth, I caught the videographer's head dip toward his phone. A new message. He glanced around the room, scanning faces until his eyes flicked past me, quick and nervous. I knew exactly what was happening. She wasn't just cutting me out of this moment. She was reaching backwards, slicing me out of every moment before it too. My phone buzzed in my hand. Against my better judgment, I looked. A new message in a family group chat I hadn't opened in months. Celine's name lit up the screen. Sent privately, though everyone would eventually feel its echo. Delete any footage that includes her. All of it. By the time the cake was cut, the atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted. What had once been joy now hummed with choreography. It wasn't celebration anymore. It was orchestration. The lighting dimmed in perfect time with the music servers glided between tables in synchrony, and every smile, every toast, every gesture felt staged, as if someone backstage was pulling invisible strings, tightening them around us all. I stood on the fringe, half hidden behind a marble column near the last row of tables. My glass of champagne had gone flat. The bubbles long surrendered, but I held it anyway. Something to occupy my hand while my mind refused to be still. From this distance, I could see Celine lean toward the DJ, her lips barely moving as she whispered instructions. Then came that smile, the same tight-lipped expression she always reserved for moments when she thought she was winning. The music softened. The lights dimmed further. A projection screen descended, greeted by a hush of anticipation. Guests turned in unison, chairs creaking as all eyes fixed on the glowing canvas at the front of the room. The montage began. A carefully edited reel of Celine and Garrett packaged as a love story. It opened with baby pictures, their faces toothless and bright, followed by grainy home videos from the 90s. Childhood snapshots gave way to adolescent triumphs, then to their smiling engagement portraits. The crowd cooed and chuckled, murmuring their approval in the language of nostalgia. Look how little she was. That beach shot is everything. Oh my God, that's Celine in 3rd grade. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I watched in silence, not because I was surprised, but because I needed to see. I needed to know how far she was willing to go to excise me. Thanksgiving 2004. I had carved the turkey that year. Celine had spilled red wine across the tablecloth. The clip played, the laughter rang out, but my hands, my voice, my presence gone. Spring break in Malibu. I had been the one holding the camera, my feet sunk in the sand while she ran down the shoreline, hair flying behind her. That footage appeared, but cropped wide enough to erase the faint shadow of me at the frame's edge. College graduation. The party had been in my apartment because she couldn't afford a venue. I had strung lights across the ceiling, baked cupcakes, filled the fridge with cheap champagne. On the screen, she smiled in cap and gown, friends cheering around her. My walls, my decorations, my cupcakes gone. Every cut was deliberate. Every omission calculated. This wasn't oversight. It was curation. My eyes drifted to Mara, the videographer, standing stiff near the corner. Her arms were folded, her jaw tight, her gaze refusing to rest on me. For one split second, our eyes met. She looked away immediately. Shame flickering across her face like a flame she couldn't hide. And in that instant, I understood. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about erasure. Not just removing me from a scene, but carving me out of memory itself. My phone buzzed. The name flashing across the screen made my chest tighten ends. I hadn't seen that name in years. For a moment, I almost didn't open it, but curiosity always wins. Her message was short, sharp, and edged with pity. She told the editor to delete anything with you in it. Said she was cleansing the image. Attached was a screenshot. I tapped it, and there it was in black and white, Celine's exact words forwarded straight from Mara. If Venus shows up in anything, cut it. This is my day, not a family reunion. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred in the glass. Something inside me cracked, but it didn't shatter. Not this time. Instead, I moved. Not hurried. Not dramatic. Just deliberate. I slipped out of the ballroom past the polished doors that kept the celebration humming like a machine. The hallway outside was empty quiet except for the squeak of a cartwheel as a hotel staff member adjusted linens nearby. The light from a wall sconce painted everything in warm amber, and for the first time all night I could breathe. I unlocked my phone again and scrolled to the family group chat, the one that buzzed constantly with baby updates, birthday reminders, obligatory Merry Christmas from Florida messages, the digital scrapbook of people who always seemed louder online than in real life. Without hesitation, I uploaded the screenshot. At first, I let it sit there raw and self-explanatory, but then my fingers moved. I typed slowly, each word deliberate. I won't be in your history, but I'll leave a footnote in your memory. Send. The sound came a moment later, like dominoes falling, a ripple carried through the walls. Buzzes, notifications, dozens of phones lighting up in tandem inside the ballroom. Through the crack of the door, I caught fragments, gasps, murmurs, the stutter of laughter turning into silence. A distant uncle peered at his screen, brows arching high. Lorraine, poised and polished in her mother-of-the-bride gown, went pale as she scrolled. Garrett shifted uncomfortably, leaning toward Celine, but she didn't lift her head. Not once. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. Instead, I pivoted sharply on my heel and walked toward the reception desk. The young woman there was reshuffling envelopes, eyes flicking up as I approached. She straightened instinctively. I need to reserve a private conference room, I said, calm as if I were ordering tea. Of course, she replied quickly, fumbling for her clipboard. Under what name? I paused just long enough for it to matter. Venus Calloway. Make sure it's spelled correctly. Minutes later, I was seated in a beige-walled conference room. Bland. Neutral. Perfect. No flowers, no candles, no curated centerpieces, just four walls, a wooden table, and silence thick enough to steady me. I'd asked the manager to dim the lights slightly, and once the door shut, I told her not to let anyone else in. I waited. Elbows resting lightly on the armrests, fingers tracing the edge of the table. When the door opened, I didn't flinch. Lorraine entered first, tight-lipped and rigid, then Celine, her expression carved from glass. Garrett trailed a step behind her, already looking guilty, already sweating. And finally, Ruben, his footsteps heavier than the rest. No one spoke. Not at first. The silence filled the room, a presence all its own, heavy and watchful. I didn't rise to greet them. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small, crumpled rectangle that had haunted me all evening. My name card. Venus Calloway. Overflow table 6B. I smoothed it gently against the table's surface, then set it down in the exact center, its edges bent, its ink already fading. This I said, my voice steady, but carrying the weight of everything unspoken was made last minute. No one expected me to show. So someone told the planner to tuck me wherever there was space. Overflow. Celine crossed her arms, impatience flickering in her eyes like a child caught before bedtime. She didn't realize this wasn't about the card at all. This was about erasure. And I wasn't going quietly. Lorraine stayed quiet, her face carved into something unreadable, a mask she had perfected over years of not saying what she really thought. Garrett's eyes flicked nervously between the three of them, like he was searching for the right script and couldn't find it. Ruben let out a breath that sounded heavier than words. I'm not here for drama, I said finally. My voice steady, though my chest felt like it was holding back a storm. I just want you to see it. The pattern you've worked so hard to pretend doesn't exist. They said nothing. No denial, no acknowledgement. Just silence. The kind that burns hotter than shouting. So I pressed on. Jaime told me something earlier. I continued, my gaze settling on Lorraine. He said, Mom said we don't have to hug you if we don't want to. Celine's jaw tightened, a flicker of annoyance breaking her carefully composed exterior. Lorraine shifted in her chair, her fingers brushing the strap of her purse, but she didn't deny it. I'm not mad at him, I said quickly before the excuse could come. He's just a child. He's repeating what he hears. But let me ask you, Lorraine, when did I become someone you had to explain away to your grandchildren? When did my existence turn into something you had to justify? She blinked once, slow, deliberate. Finally, she murmured, Venus. This isn't the time. No. My voice cut through the room sharper than I intended, but I didn't pull it back. That's the problem. It's never the time. It's always not today or after the wedding or don't ruin the mood. But what you really mean is, there was never going to be a time. You never intended to acknowledge me at all. The air shifted. Garrett cleared his throat eyes, dropping to the table. I didn't know it was this bad. He muttered half to himself. His voice was soft, almost apologetic, but too thin to carry any weight. Celine rolled her eyes sharp and practiced. She's just upset because once again it's not about her. Finally, Ruben spoke, his voice low and weary. This day wasn't supposed to be about all this. I turned toward him. Exactly. That's how it's always worked. It's never about this. That's how you've kept it hidden for decades. You erase it. You bury it. You tell yourselves it's not the right moment. But it's been the right moment for years, you just didn't want to face it. The quiet that followed was thick, pressing against my ribs like fog filling the chest. I stood my chair, scraping gently against the tile floor. I'm not waiting for an apology. I said softer now, but unwavering. I don't need a performance. I just needed to say it out loud in a room where none of you could walk away. Celine looked down at her phone, scrolling with deliberate disinterest, her expression unreadable. Lorraine tapped her manicured fingers against her purse, steady but restless. Garrett sat frozen, caught between loyalties. Ruben opened his mouth again, but I lifted a hand. Not harsh. Just final. You don't owe me closure, I said quietly, but I don't owe you silence anymore either. I stepped back, heels clicking lightly against the tile as I moved toward the door. Behind me, Selena's voice snapped like glass hitting concrete. You always wanted to ruin this for me. I didn't turn around. Not once. The hallway outside was quieter than I remembered, almost peaceful. I passed 2 staff members setting coffee trays, their laughter soft, unaware of the fracture I had just walked away from. The ballroom was still alive with music as I passed it, laughter spilling out silverware, clinking against dessert plates, the screens still glowing with their curated love story. From the outside, everything was untouched. Beautiful, perfect. But not mine. Never mine. I didn't stay for the ending. There were no hugs goodbye, no polite smiles, no obligatory family snapshots. Just me walking out through the front lobby, past the concierge arranging tomorrow's seating charts, and into the cool morning air. Daylight made the resort look different. Less enchanted, more honest. The spell was broken. Guests wandered the courtyard in bathrobes, sipping coffee, smiling at one another like nothing had happened, like they hadn't been complicit in the cruelty of the night before. That part stung, but not the way it once would have. This time I let it wash over me and pass through not something I carried like a stone in my chest. The wedding had gone on without me, just like the family always had. And for the first time, I felt the strange calm of knowing I didn't need their stage to exist. I pulled the rental car out of the lot tires, crunching softly against the gravel, and steered toward the highway. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need the noise. The silence felt like the only honest soundtrack for what had just happened. With the window cracked open, the salty breeze found its way in, tugging at my hair, cool against my skin. Each mile I put between myself and that venue felt like an exhale I'd been holding in for years. For the first time in a long time, my chest wasn't tight. I could breathe. My phone sat silent on the passenger seat. No calls, no texts. Not from Celine, not from Lorraine, not even Garrett, the only one in the room who'd had the decency to look uncomfortable while the truth unraveled in front of him. And strangely, I didn't want to hear from them. I wasn't waiting for an apology cloaked in excuses or a half-hearted, it got out of hand. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. They hadn't said goodbye, and I no longer needed them to. Back at the hotel, I moved with deliberate slowness as though each motion was a ritual of letting go. I folded the cream dress carefully, smoothing its fabric before tucking it into my suitcase. The same care you'd give to something you never planned on wearing again. Then I pulled out the crumpled name card, the afterthought they'd slipped onto the table, and slid it behind my driver's license in my wallet. I didn't throw it away. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some reminders weren't meant to be erased. They were meant to be carried until they no longer stung. Behind it, folded once, and fragile now, was the card my grandmother had written me years ago. The ink had faded, but her words still burned. Your joy. Don't let them dim your light. I traced my thumb across the letters as though I could feel her hand guiding mine. She had given it to me after Celine received an award I had quietly helped her earn back when no one thought my contribution mattered enough to mention. Even then, my grandmother had seen me when no one else bothered to look. She always had. Packing the rest was quick, almost mechanical. Toothbrush, shoes, zipper closed. But just before I shut the bag, I paused. I picked up my phone not to call anyone from that ballroom, but to dial a different number. Lauren, an old friend in Boston. The kind of friend who texted out of nowhere just to say, "I thought of you today," and meant it. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Hey, you okay?" I closed my eyes and for the first time that weekend, smiled. "I am now," I said. "Remember that trip to Maine we always talked about? The one we never took because life and family kept getting in the way?" She let out a sleepy laugh. "You serious, dead serious?" I replied. "I just booked the train. Keep your weekend open. Because sometimes family isn't the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people who share your silences, your truths, and still stay." I checked out of the hotel before noon. The manager, kind-eyed and steady, handed me the receipt with a soft, "Safe travels." It was such a small kindness, but after days of sharp edges and cold shoulders, it felt extraordinary. The road curved along the coastline, sunlight catching the water in flashes of silver. Just before the freeway entrance, I spotted another wedding party gathered near the rocks. Different colors, different faces, same practiced rituals. A little girl in a pale blue dress spun in circles, her laughter carrying across the wind. She caught sight of me in the car, and for no reason at all, she waved. I waved back. It was nothing. And yet somehow it was everything. I didn't leave that weekend to destroy something. I left to finally begin building. For years, I thought walking away meant surrender, that it was proof of weakness. But now I understand sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. Sometimes it means finally choosing yourself. When life keeps teaching you to be invisible, when you're always the one expected to shrink into the background, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting for someone to notice you and open your own door instead. This isn't just about weddings or family gatherings where your name gets left off the program. It's about something deeper: dignity. It's about recognizing that silence is powerful, yes, but only up to a point. Beyond that, silence stops being strength and starts becoming permission for others to overlook you, to dismiss you, to decide you don't count. Maybe you know that feeling. Being pushed to the edge of the photograph, half smiling while someone else shines in the center. Being seated at the far corner of the table like your presence was an afterthought. Or worse, being written out of someone else's story entirely, as if you never mattered. If that's ever been you, I hope you carry this truth: you still matter. You always did. You don't need to fold yourself smaller to fit their frame. You're allowed to take up space. In fact, you're allowed to be the whole frame. So, let me ask you, have you ever had to choose peace over family? To walk away from the table, not because you didn't care, but because you finally cared enough about yourself? What did you leave behind? And what did you gain? Share your story in the comments. Because stories like yours remind the rest of us we're not alone. If this moment resonated with you, if it stirred something you've been carrying quietly, drop a 1 in the comments, or simply tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't connect with you, I'd still love to know why. Every perspective matters here because every voice matters. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, raw, real, unpolished stories that reach for the heart and stay with you long after the screen fades, don't forget to subscribe. If this video found you today, maybe it's because it was meant to.